please come and take us through the next session. How many minutes do you need? Okay. She says she'll be very brief, not more than 10. Karibu.
Thank you very much, Session Chair and Honorable Speaker and Honorable Senators. I'm very cognizant of the fact that this presentation now lies between us and lunch, so I will endeavor to be very brief. This is a presentation on the committee system in the Senate and how senators can link their legislative agenda to their committee assignment. And very briefly, by way of outline, we will basically just have a few slides on the introduction, committees in the Senate, how to link your legislative agenda to your committee assignment, some experiences from the 12th Parliament, what next for committees starting now, and then a small conclusion. On the next slide, the introduction. Committees, as you know, Honorable Senators, are smaller units or groups of members of Parliament, basically set up to perform several functions at the same time, because we cannot do, senators cannot process all the business that requires to be processed within plenary sittings. So committees enable senators to undertake detailed consideration of their matters, and the outcome from committee sittings then feeds back into plenary by way of committee reports that are then debated and resolved on by the plenary as a whole. There is a statement that I'm sure you're aware of, ascribed to Woodrow Wilson, that Congress in session is Congress on public exhibition, but Congress in its committee rooms is Congress at work. And I think the same can be said of committees in the Senate. A bit on the rationale on the next slide for parliamentary committees. They are laboratories. Committees feed into the Senate. They produce business for the Senate. So they are basically the laboratories for legislative work. They allow for in-depth work by Parliament. Not everything can be considered in depth at plenary. They allow for proper oversight. Parliamentary oversight has come up quite a bit in recent days. But they also allow for senators to build and utilize their respective expertise and skills, because each senator comes with, unique expertise, unique skills, and they are certainly a forum through which we are able to engage with the public. In terms of the constitutional and legal framework, Articles 93, 94, 96, those have been spoken to on the general mandate of the Senate, but that also influences your work and affects your work within committees. Article 124.1 provides for the establishment of committees and mandates and empowers each of the houses through its standing orders to establish committees. And 124.2, Article 124.2 also provides or enables the houses to form joint committees. And I'll say something brief about that. So our committees are established in the standing orders. There are some in statute and some are also established by resolution. On the next slide, the classification of Senate committees. Just briefly, we have the first broad category of the committees that we have, housekeeping committees, and I'll say a little about that. Then we have standing committees, the second category. The third are oversight or scrutiny committees. The fourth are special or ad hoc committees. The fifth are joint committees, and then we have the sixth, which is joint sittings of committees. On housekeeping committees, on the next slide, these are committees that basically deal with matters of internal organization and flow of work in the Senate, basically ensuring that the work of the Senate through plenary and through committees is flowing as it should. And on the next slide, this just sets out the 4 housekeeping committees we have, starting with the Senate Business Committee, which is chaired by the Honorable Speaker and has the leadership as part of the membership and 7 other senators. And basically, this is the committee that oversees the implementation of Senate business, the sort of overarching committee, so to speak. Then we have the Procedure and Rules Committee that again is chaired by the Honorable Speaker and basically considers all matters concerning the standing orders. Any amendments or reviews to the standing orders are considered by this committee. The third committee, that's a housekeeping committee, is the liaison committee. This is chaired by the Honorable Deputy Speaker and consists of all the chairs of the other committees. So it's a committee of chairs. Membership is on account of being a chair of a committee. Basically, this committee seeks to coordinate the operations of all the committees in the Senate. And then the last housekeeping committee is the Powers and Privileges Committee. This one is established by statute. It's an interesting one that exists to inquire into the conduct of a member where the member's conduct is alleged to constitute a breach of privilege. Ideally, it shouldn't sit very often, but when necessary, it holds its sittings. The second major category of committees are standing committees. These ones are thematic in nature. Broadly, they correspond to the ministries in the executive, but not entirely. And we have 14 of them. The 14 committees on the next slide are actually set out in the standing orders in the fourth schedule. So members are able to have a look at those. Just to note that a senator cannot serve in more than 2 standing committees at a go. The third category of committees are oversight committees or scrutiny committees. For these ones, in the case of standing committees, a member once appointed, unless discharged by the political party or the parliamentary party, serves for the duration of the term of parliament, for the 5 years. For oversight or scrutiny of committees, senators serve for the first 3 sessions, and after that, the committees are reconstituted for the remainder of the term, which is 2 years. Which are the oversight committees? We have the County Public Accounts Committee, Standing Order 193, looking at the accounts of county governments. We have the County Public Investments and Special Funds Committee that looks at the funds from county public investments. And we also have a committee on delegated legislation that scrutinizes statutory instruments coming from the executive. Of course, honorable senators who served in the previous term will recall that the County Public Accounts and Investments Committee, CPIC, was now split into the 2 committees. On the next slide, we have special or ad hoc committees. These committees are established by resolution of the Senate or by law when need arises. And they serve for a specific mandate and only for a specific period of time. What are the examples? Mediation committees are one example of special or ad hoc committees, and that has been explained. In the last Senate, we had 13 bills that were referred to mediation committees. Mediation committees are normally quite tough. 7 of those bills, between the membership of both houses, they reached consensus, and 7 of those were approved by both houses. The others lapsed. Another category of special or ad hoc committees, we have committees on impeachment that has been spoken to. Impeachment may proceed either in plenary or in committee. And in the last Senate, we had 5 proposed impeachments that were processed through committees. We also have other ad hoc committees that can be established by resolution of the House, usually advisedly not too many because they'll obviously clash with the mandate of the standing committees. In the last Senate, the Senate found it fit to establish some ad hoc committees. We had a committee on the Solai Dam tragedy, on maize, on tea, on managed equipment, MES, and the COVID-19 pandemic. On the next slide, joint committees. We also are empowered, as I mentioned, in the Constitution to establish joint committees between the 2 houses. In the 11th Parliament, the standing orders of both houses actually had provision for 2 joint committees, one on parliamentary broadcasting and library, and one on national cohesion and equal opportunity. But at the end of that term of Parliament, we amended our standing orders and we no longer had joint committees, bicameral relations. In this last Parliament, we did not establish any, not by standing orders and not by resolution. But that provision exists. Where necessary, we can have joint committees. On the next slide, joint sittings of committees. 2 or more committees of the Senate can sit together to consider a matter where there is cross-cutting mandate, but we can also have two equivalent committees, one of the Senate and one of the National Assembly, also sitting to consider a matter of joint interest or cross-cutting nature between them. In the last Senate, we had a number of joint sittings of our committees within the Senate. It comes with its pros and cons. We also had some joint sittings of committees of the National Assembly and the Senate. An example is the BBI, the Constitution Amendment Bill. The committees sat jointly, Senator Omogeni's committee and the counterpart committee in the National Assembly, to consider that bill. And we also had joint sittings when we were vetting the Inspector General of the National Police. On the next slide, the mandate and functions of committees, those of the housekeeping committees and the scrutiny committees, those are very specific in the standing orders. For the other committees, especially the standing committees, the cross-cutting functions, basically processing all the business that my colleague, Deputy Clerk Mohammed, mentioned. Once it is introduced in the Senate, whether it is a bill, a petition, whether it is, a statement, all these issues find their way into committees for closer scrutiny. We've mentioned oversight earlier, undertaking inquiries, especially on topical issues, involvement in the budget process, as well as follow-up on implementation of resolutions, so that we don't have resolutions that are yet to be implemented. On the next slide, just to state briefly that committees have various powers and privileges that are provided for in law, in the Constitution, in the Powers and Privileges Act, and in the standing orders. Mainly, just to mention some of the key ones, committees can summon witnesses. We traditionally will do an invitation letter, as a courtesy of sorts, but committees have the power to summon witnesses and to enforce attendance or to enforce the production of documentation where need be. Freedom of speech, as well as immunity from legal proceedings for what you say during committee sittings, and of course in plenary, and for reports that you write. On the next slide, this is the issue of placement of senators to serve in committees. How does this occur? How do you end up serving in one committee or the other? It all starts, of course, with parliamentary parties, and I would imagine that they would consider a number of factors within parties: your expertise, your interest to serve in various committees, of course, party loyalty and such like considerations, regional balance, gender, special interest groups. So it all starts at the parliamentary party level. Then in the Senate, under Standing Order 197, the parliamentary parties then submit their requests to the Senate Business Committee, which means, of course, then that the Senate Business Committee needs to be established ASAP, and long before we get to establishment of committees. Then the Senate Business Committee collects all these names, ensures that they accord with the standing orders, and then tables the list in the Senate. On the next slide, just to note that once the list is tabled, no objection can be made against individual senators and where they have been placed. Any objections must be to the list as a whole. On the next slide, we can go to the issue of linking your legislative agenda to your committee assignment. Just to note that beyond your work as senators in the counties and in plenary, your legacy will also be greatly shaped by what you do and your achievements in committee. And we suggest 4 key factors just to ensure that you're able to prosecute your agenda as a senator. And this will be dependent, for example, on how effective you are as a committee member, how prepared are you for meetings, your attendance to the meetings, your contribution to the discussion, relationship building, etc., how intentional you are in agenda setting and in prioritization of business in committee, how strategic you are in navigating business once it goes to plenary. My colleague mentioned that there are sometimes bottlenecks here and there. How strategic are we in navigating that business, and how persistent we are in pursuing implementation of the resolutions. Very briefly, just to touch on the experiences in the last Senate, in the 12th Parliament, the statistics there just indicate the amount of legislative business that's processed through committees. Huge amounts of work, because committees are able to work, almost simultaneously. We had 418 or so plenary sittings, but 4,800 or thereabouts in committee sittings. So that just shows the numbers in terms of the amount of work required, and yet within very short periods of time. On the next slide, one of the other experiences, committees also provide an opportunity for senators to connect with the counties and with the public. Through county visits, you're able to do county visits, you're able to handle petitions that are coming from the public, to handle statements once they are referred to the committees, and either from your own volition or through suggestion, through various means, to conduct inquiries. So they are an excellent means by which we connect with the counties and with the public at large. Public participation, as I mentioned, great opportunity for public participation in committees, but in terms of the experiences in the last Senate, sometimes very low turnout from the public, very, very low turnout or submissions coming back from the public. Number 4, which was mentioned earlier, so I won't belabor the point, delays in processing legislative business. Sadly, we had petitions that were referred to committees in the last Senate, but they were not concluded at the end of the term, meaning they lapse, and meaning that those members of the public are left without a response from the Senate. So just ensuring that all business is moving through. Contestation, number 5, was mentioned by Senator Omogeni. The usual contestation with the National Assembly. We are looking to better days ahead on matters of legislation and matters of the deliberative mandate. Attendance of witnesses. The fact that we will sometimes summon CSs, invite them by letter, invite them again, finally do summons, and just having non-attendance of the witnesses that we invite. Some operational challenges, quorum, budget constraints, which we pray will be handled through the Parliamentary Service Commission. What next for committees? The next slide. We are at the place where next would be, ideally, first and foremost, the constitution of the Senate Business Committee, because as I mentioned, this paves way for the others, and then the constitution of all the other committees. The election next would be election of chairpersons and vice chairs of all the committees. Then, of course, that naturally will constitute the liaison committee. And after that, we are looking to conduct inductions for the liaison committee and then for all the other committees. At the inductions, we will share with you exit reports from each of the committees. Each of the predecessor committees prepared an exit reports detailing what they did, their challenges were, and the gaps and the way forward for the new committees. And of course, after that, each of the committees, under the guidance of the chairs, will work on their respective work plans. In conclusion, the last slide, just to mention that, again, the legislative mandate of the Senate is limited, but it's important to note in committee that the deliberative and inquisitorial mandate is not limited for committees. So just to encourage that we continue to keep up with topical issues that we need to consider. Also, just to note on behalf and working under the clerk that we will provide a well-trained and multidisciplinary staff to work with each of the committees. And the last point is just to emphasize what my colleague stated. 5 years is a short time. So for each of the committees, and even as an individual senator, the best time to start is now, so that we are able to ensure that the legislative agenda is realized. Thank you very much.
Can we appreciate Eunice in a better way, please? Okay.